Okay, so this is question 4 in the sources paper, and this is my absolute favourite question because it's really easy to get 10 out of 10 on this question. And so if you follow the instructions that I'm about to give you, hopefully you will be able to replicate it in the exam and also get 10 out of 10. This question is the utility question, and it's asking you how useful two sources are as evidence of something, and in this case it's attitudes towards the Hollywood 10. Now it's always sources D and E, and in the exam you won't have read those sources yet, so you do have to factor in some time in this question to actually read the sources. Now I've got the sources here, hopefully you can see those. So you can see that source D is a photograph of a march of leading actors and filmmakers in October 1947. They were members of the Committee for the First Amendment protesting about the treatment of the Hollywood 10. And down at the bottom we've got source E, which is from a broadcast by Judy Garland, who was a leading Hollywood actress. And this is from October 1947, and the programme was called Hollywood Fights Back. I'm just going to give you 20 seconds to read source E. Okay, so the reason that this question I think is really easy is because there are just 4 things that you have to do in order to get top marks. You have to discuss the usefulness of D, you have to discuss the usefulness of E, you have to discuss why and how D may be limited in terms of its utility, and then you must also discuss why E may be limited in terms of its utility. And if you do these 4 things, you will get 10 out of 10. If you were to just do 2 of these things, so let's just say you did the usefulness of D and E, that would probably get you around 7 out of 10 if you did that well. If you covered 3 of the boxes here, that would probably get you 9 out of 10, and then if we cover all 4, then we should hopefully gain ourselves 10 out of 10. So as I mentioned with the previous question, it would help if you do have a copy of the sources in front of you while we go through how I would analyse the sources. But I do actually have a copy of the source on each slide, and I'm hoping that you can see that. So the first thing that we're going to do is think about why D is useful for attitudes towards the Hollywood 10. That's the other important thing. You've got to make sure that you know what the focus is. So how useful are they as evidence of attitudes towards the Hollywood 10? I'm going to have to do my box again. So, source D, as we said, was a photograph of a march of leading actors and filmmakers in October 1947. They were members of the Committee for the First Amendment protesting about the treatment of the Hollywood 10. Okay, so one reason that source D is useful is because it shows that a large proportion, I suppose, of actors were prepared to put their careers at risk in order to support the Hollywood 10, because we can see here that they are marching. Bear in mind as well that we know that at this time, if you stood up for somebody who was being accused of being a communist, then you were actually putting yourself at risk as well, which makes this even more useful and even more interesting, I suppose. The other reason I would say that this was useful is because it tells us that people came out in support of the Hollywood 10 using the First Amendment, which related to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, And so it tells us that it wasn't just the Hollywood 10 who were wanting that to be enforced, but that lots of people supported the Hollywood 10 in that. Now, that would be one box. As I said, we have to cover 4 boxes by the end of the analysis. So we will now look at why D is limited, or if it is actually limited. So, let's choose a different colour. We know from our work that we've done in class, we've done lots of work on photographs, that sometimes they're very useful, but sometimes there are limitations. So, as we know, this is just one moment in time. It's one protest. We don't know if lots of others happened around the country or around Hollywood at the time. And the other reason that it could be fairly limited is that it could have been taken for publicity purposes. Remember, these people are involved in media, and it could be staged and being taken to publicise what they were hoping to achieve. And you know, some keywords that you want to get into your answer are really how typical this scene is, and how representative it is. They would be 2 nice words that you could include. So at this point we've done 2 boxes, and as I said earlier, if that was written nicely, and you were using evidence from the source to support your points, that would hopefully get you somewhere towards the top of level 2. But we're looking today at how we get top marks for this answer. So we need to now switch our attention to look at source E. Now, source E is from a broadcast by Judy Garland, who is a leading Hollywood actress. This is again in October 1947, and the programme is called Hollywood Fights Back. For the past week in Washington, the House Committee of Un-American Activities has been investigating the film industry. Now, I have never been a member of any political organisation, but I've been following this investigation and I don't like it. There are a lot of stars here to speak to you. We're show business, yes, but we're also American citizens. It's one thing if someone says we're not good actors, that hurts, but we can take that. It's something else again to say we're not good Americans. We resent that. So let's go straight in with the analysis. Source E is useful because again it shows us, in this instance, an actress, or actually a very well-known actress, coming out in support of the Hollywood 10. We've also got to bear in mind that this was broadcast on a very popular radio programme. And so again, it's the idea of somebody really putting themselves and their careers on the line to stand up for what they think is right and to stand up for the Hollywood 10 who they think are being treated unfairly. We could also, looking at the title of the programme, it's called Hollywood Fights Back, and that's telling us that a whole programme was dedicated to defending the Hollywood 10 and standing up for them again, so that's showing us more support. Okay, so at this point we've covered 3 boxes, so hopefully if it was written well we'd be looking at something around 9 out of 10, but to push it towards top marks we need to do our 4 boxes, we need to have our 4 boxes of analysis, and so we're just going to very briefly look at why E may be limited. So I suppose the first thing we might say is that this is just one person's view. This is Judy Garland. However, we know that she's on a programme that, you know, has been created to air views like Garland's, and also it corroborates with other things we know. For example, it's supporting what we can see in source D. So it's maybe telling us that this sort of opinion was fairly typical for the time, and that her views were probably quite representative of lots of Hollywood actors and actresses at that time. You may say that it is limited because Judy Garland may be friends with some of the Hollywood 10, and so she may want to exaggerate the HUAC's activities in order to get sympathy for her friends. But overall, that would probably be the only limitation, although we did start to think that that was a limitation, because her view is represented in D, and we think that it is actually fairly typical. That actually becomes a strength and not a limit. Okay, so by this point we've now hit our 4 boxes. So potentially, providing that our points were developed with either evidence from the source, or we can actually use a little bit of own knowledge to develop our points, we would potentially be getting 10 out of 10. Now I'm just going to quickly change the colour of some of the text just to emphasise and reinforce the things that we've been talking about. So D was the photograph showing the actors and actresses having or taking part in a protest march. Now from this point onwards I'm going to have strengths in blue and limitations in red. So they were all strengths, you know. It showed that a large proportion of actors were prepared to put their careers at risk, and that they were also in support of the First Amendment. Over here in E, we had the extract from Judy Garland's talk on the radio programme. We had here again lots of strengths. So the fact that, you know, she was a very well-known actress coming out in support of the Hollywood 10, it was on a very popular radio programme, it was a whole programme devoted to Hollywood Fights Back. So again, we've got lots of strengths here, lots of evidence to tell us about attitudes towards the Hollywood 10. In terms of limitations for the sources, we decided that actually D was a little limited because it was a photograph, it was just one moment in time, and that it could have been taken for publicity purposes, so that was a limitation. And over when we looked at E, we initially decided that it was one person's view, and so potentially that was a limitation, but actually that because her views were supported by what we'd seen in another source, that we were actually thinking that her views were typical for the time and representative of lots of other Hollywood actors. And so we decided that that was a strength. However, she could have been friends with the actors and actresses involved, and so she may have wanted to exaggerate the actions and the activities of the HUAC. Now, when you're writing it up, you could literally use this as your writing frame. So this would be your first paragraph and this might be your second. And you might want to arrive at some sort of judgment as to overall which source was more useful for telling you about attitudes towards the Hollywood 10. And you would probably be siding with source E for this question, because you can see that we've got lots of blue points telling us why it's useful, that are relating to not only the content but also the provenance of the source.